Good afternoon. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. Earlier this year, we did a three-part series exposing the child welfare system as the industry that it is. Across the country, Indigenous children in particular are being apprehended at astounding rates. They're lodged in a system that hundreds of thousands of jobs rely on across this country. Today, we're putting CFS in focus once again. This time, we're looking at two cases in particular. The first gained headlines nationally and internationally. It was in British Columbia, where a mother had signed over her daughter to foster care because she couldn't afford to feed her. While in care, the girl was sexually abused, and in a lawsuit against the province, because she said that her social worker had been stealing money from her and several other children who were in care. It was money that was earmarked for them. Adding insult to injury, this same girl was seen in a video that was seen around the world last week as an RCMP officer interrogated her, asking hugely inappropriate questions about if she enjoyed that assault. Later in the show, we will meet a couple who were foster parents, they had children of their own, and then had a baby apprehended when they took him in for simple medical care, and the nightmare that ensued for them to get him back. Their lawyer is going to join us as well. It's a shocking case for those who don't know how the Millennium Scoop works. We want you to join in our conversation. That means you two listening on Element FM radio in Toronto and Ottawa. Our phone lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet it at APTN InFocus. Before I introduce you to our guests, here's a story about the girl who went to police with a sexual assault complaint. She was a child who was in care, and how she was treated by the investigating officer. It's a story that we often hear too often about vulnerable women who say that they're victims of crime and how they're treated when they go to police, but too rarely do we actually get to see proof like this.
I didn't consent, but I didn't say no.
So you just went along with it?
I was scared. I didn't know what else to do.
This video of police questioning an Indigenous teen girl has created a ripple of emotions across the country.
It was totally inappropriate. And I don't know where people get that kind of right to re-victimize somebody. It's disgusting.
Will you talk about this with the Justice Minister to try and address this issue?
Judicial training is something that is becoming increasingly important as we go forward.
APTN obtained a copy of the video, which is from 2012. APTN is not identifying the teen. In the video, Kelowna RCMP questioned the teen about an alleged sexual assault. It goes on for more than 2 hours. At one point, the officer says,
because I need to know, were you at all turned on during this at all, even a little bit?
No.
Physically, you weren't at all responsive to his advances, even maybe subconsciously?
Maybe subconsciously, but no, not. I was really scared.
He's taking your clothes off. How much of a fight did you put up for him not to take your clothes off?
But I don't remember him taking my clothes off.
But you told me, like, I'm reading in your statement right here where it says he took your pants and your shirt off and your phone fell out of your pocket when your shirt came off.
I remember that, but I don't, like, it's hard to explain. I didn't think. I just went, like, there's a fight or flight response, and...
In a statement to APTN, RCMP said, "The RCMP is not in a position to provide further context or perspective, as the case is subject to restrictions under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, an ongoing criminal code matter, and civil litigation proceedings." Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
APTN Investigates Holly Moore has traveled to British Columbia and sat down with the girl that we just saw in that 2012 video. I talked with Holly Moore yesterday from Kelowna. Here's that interview. There's been a lot of fallout since APTN broke this story last week. It's made headlines internationally. Let's start with the BC Children's Advocate's response.
So we spoke to Jennifer Charlesworth, who's the children's advocate for BC, and she was very concerned. She was disgusted by the content of the video. She expressed interest in finding out more about what happened to the young woman. She also, she really made the point that fundamentally it is the BC ministry that is responsible for the situation that this young woman found herself in. She didn't make any firm commitments on camera, but she certainly has said she's going to do something.
You had the opportunity to sit down with the victim in this video and her mother. What did they have to say?
You know, it was a heart-wrenching interview. Her mother expressed a lot of guilt, a lot of shame about having her daughter in that position in the first place. She did reiterate that she remembered the incident. She remembered the details that her daughter spoke to her about. You know, she's like a lot of Indigenous women across this country. She had a voluntary apprehension. She gave her child to BC Child Welfare, hoping they'd be able to provide her with a better life than the mother could. And so, of course, this is sort of a mother's dream that turned into a mother's nightmare. Now, speaking with the young woman herself, she's very traumatized. She's overwhelmed by the attention. She finds, you know, rewatching the video humiliating. And, you know, but she's very steadfast. She said, you know, the reason I came forward is so that this does not happen to anybody ever again. But again, she's, you know, there was a moment in her interview which will be airing that, you know, she just breaks down and she says, I just wanted somebody to believe me, and now they do.
How old is this girl now? I mean, the video is a few years old. How old is she now, and how's she doing?
Well, she's 24. She is, I'm not going to provide that many details about her personal life because this is a small town. She, you know, has had multiple traumas. She's been diagnosed with PTSD. Some of her healthcare professionals have expressed that, you know, on top of all these layers of traumas, this is probably the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to her. You know, she's fragile. Spending time with her, you know, we tried to go out for lunch. We tried to do something that would kind of take the edge off the emotional nature of this interview. And, you know, it was great to finally meet her in person and hear her story firsthand.
You speak about the trauma and the story. So this isn't the first time that she's been abused within the system. APTN Investigates has done a story involving this girl. Remind us what she's part of a lawsuit and why that is the case.
So she was caught up in a scheme that was perpetrated by a social worker named Robert Riley Saunders. And the scheme describes allegations that he would siphon off funds from his clients' bank accounts. So he would open up bank accounts and then, you know, take what he needed and give them kind of what was ever left over. So this young woman and others, we now know that there are 45 files that are opened with Jennifer Charlesworth's office. So that's 45 victims. They think that there's many more. But the ones that are involved described homelessness, drug addiction, even sexual exploitation as the result of the social workers' siphoning of their funds. So she, you know, she described a home life, which her mother really confirmed, where there was never any food in the house. They lived in a house, but they had no food, they had no furniture. She was left alone for long periods of time. And so, you know, this is really a complex case where this young Indigenous woman has been essentially traumatized her entire life. And it really, the peak of that traumatization was this video that everybody's been watching. So I think we have to keep in mind that there's a real person behind there. And, you know, we've been very lucky that she's allowed us to follow her around these last couple of days, because I think that behind the headlines, there's a really good person, so who has shown incredible resilience in the face of all of this adversity. So I'm hopeful that she's going to be okay. Right now, she's just completely overwhelmed. So.
Well, and as you said, multiple layers of trauma this young woman has lived through up until now, and along with other victims who were foster wards of the province and in foster care who were victimized by this social worker. I want to know, since you've been on the ground in BC looking for accountability, what's the reaction that you've come across?
Well, you know, we haven't had a lot of time to go out and do streeters or ask around, but there's definitely a buzz in the community. So one really interesting thing happened yesterday. I was at the hospital and a nurse, at the nurse's station, were talking about this case. So it's definitely on people's minds. Now, keep in mind, in small towns, Kelowna is only 130,000 people. The RCMP can be a very, strong part of the community culture. And so I think that there's a lot of surprise. There's some distrust. There's, we'll find out more in the coming days, because we'll be going out with advocates who say, this isn't the first time that somebody has reported to police in our community, not necessarily to the RCMP or to that detachment, and were disbelieved. So, I think it's really hitting home to me that, this officer involved, this officer in charge, people want to know what's going to happen to him. There was an editorial letter, sort of a letter to the editorial in the local paper here that says that, Kelowna needs to know what is going to happen to this officer. I don't have any information about that. The RCMP has said that a more fulsome investigation will come from this, but really what I'm seeing is that in this town, this is a big deal.
So the RCMP will be investigating. That's good to know. Holly, thank you so much for the work you've done on this and for taking time out of your busy day to join us to give us this update.
Yeah, sure. Just to correct, the RCMP they haven't launched an investigation, but they've said that a more fulsome investigation will flow from this. So I just didn't want to not make that clear. Their statement was fairly vague, and so I don't want there to be any confusion there.
Don't want to commit them to more than they've committed to. Holly, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye. Thanks.
That interview that Holly did with the girl who was in that video, you can tune in tonight to APTN National News for more on that. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, a Winnipeg couple who went from foster parents to parents fighting the CFS system to get their infant son back after he was apprehended in a Winnipeg hospital. Stay with us. Join our conversation now. You can call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like and watch us live on the APTN News Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, and send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Welcome back. Tiffany and Rob Evans were living a regular middle-class life. They're working good jobs. They're raising 2 girls from previous relationships, as well as their 5-month-old son. They had previously opened their home to foster children with high needs. They wanted to provide a kind home for these kids while they were in care. But in 2013, in the blink of an eye, their lives are turned upside down. Their son, who had been sick, and one doctor, against the grain of all other medical opinions it seems, felt that their infant son was in danger in their care. CFS apprehended that baby from a Winnipeg hospital, and so began a months-long, hundreds of thousands of dollar fight to get him back. Tiffany and Rob Evans join me now. Their story might just shock you. So, full disclaimer though, through social media a few years ago, Tiffany and I discovered that we are related through our grandmothers, who were sisters. We're St. Norbert St. Boniface Métis people. It's Métis communities along the Red River here in Winnipeg, for those of you who are joining us from other parts of the country. So I had no idea what happened to your family back in 2013 until you had shared this with me while I was researching CFS stuff with the Millennium Scoop. Let's just make the jump up. This is a 3-hour story. We could sit here for 3 hours discussing this, and you would not get bored. It would be much watched TV. And it's jaw-dropping the entire way through. But we only have three-quarter or 2/3 of an hour. So let's make the jump-off point. You guys, you're raising kids. You're working. You were working as a contractor.
At that time, I was on maternity leave. I was a stay-at-home mom because
Okay.
our son was 5 months old.
Right. And you worked for a defense contractor. Yeah. Fast forward to 2013, you have this big, beautiful baby.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But not long after, he gets sick. So let's jump off there. What happened?
So our son was born May 17th. 1 week early, he was 11 pounds, 9 ounces. So
big, beautiful baby.
Big, beautiful baby, yeah. And at that time, shortly thereafter, we started having problems with every time, whether he was breastfed or bottle fed, he started regurgitating. It didn't matter who fed him, myself, my husband, family, daughters, friends, he would always regurgitate. So,
and you're trained, like, keep in mind, you have a daughter already who's older.
10 years older, yeah.
Right? And you have dealt with high needs babies. Like, this isn't your first rodeo. You're not a 16-year-old confused mom.
No.
Okay.
We have many siblings, cousins, everything else. So
we're Métis, of course we do.
Right. So
They're
we
everywhere.
have lots of family around. So we went back and forth to the doctors, tried different formulas and everything, went into the hospital in June. They had wanted to do some testing. One of the genetics doctors said to do a barium swallow. The doctor at the time decided against that and had said, you know, we'll just use a thickening formula and sent us on our merry old way. Throughout the summer, our son did gain a little bit of weight. However, in September of that year of 2013, our family pediatrician was not completely satisfied at the weight that he was, and she said, we'll check back in a month and see how he's doing. If he's lost any little bit, then we're going to go back into the hospital for some testing. October 16th, was our daughter's birthday. She was there for her annual appointment, as well as our son was there for his appointment. And she had said, well, he's lost a little bit of weight. So she says, we're going to go to Children's and do some testing. So at that point, we did meet with the doctors and the team, and we had discussed that we were going to do the barium swallow again, along with some other tests to see what was transpiring with our son.
So this is a new team of doctors and nurses, staff that are at the Health Sciences Center.
Correct.
So they're trying to catch up on what's been going on for 5 months in this baby's life with regards to eating and what's not staying down, what's working, what's not working, what's been tried.
Yeah.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So we met with the genetics doctor who we had met with back in June, and he had indicated to us in October when we were in the Children's that we are going to do the barium swallow this time. So the barium swallow was conducted on October the 18th at approximately, I'd say, 9 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, there was actually a radiologist who was in the x-ray room when our son had his barium swallow. And I looked at him and I had said...
We've got pictures of your sweetie, too.
And I had said, you know, can you tell me what's wrong? And he had said that he has gastroesophageal reflux. I had asked what the next steps were, and he had said, well, I'm not sure, that you have to discuss with the doctor. Went back up. That morning we had met with the GI doctor, and he had said that they were going to do a number of different techniques, trying to feeding and everything, and as a last resort, if he was not gaining any weight, then he would have to have a tube to be tube fed.
Right.
Shortly thereafter, I was breastfeeding Kynan, and the new doctor had come on with the team, and she came in.
I was going to say, because this is where the story takes a bit of a twist. So things are going well with the team.
Yes.
You were in the hospital for how many days by this point?
2.
2 days.
Yeah.
A new doctor enters.
Yep.
She had come in, and I will never forget this. Our son, I had just fed him, and like all the times when you're burping him, he would arch his back until he burped, and at that time he would typically...
Or throw up.
Vomit, yeah, he would throw up. So I was doing that, and our son was crying, arching his back, and she walked in with the team, and she went up against the wall, crossed her arms like this, and put her foot up against the wall, and just watched me, and she never acknowledged who she was or anything. And at the end, she said to me, she says, you're not allowed to breastfeed your son any longer. And she says, and you are not allowed to leave the ward, and I will be coming back to see you. And I got a very bad feeling from that, and I called my husband and I said, you need to come here right now.
Then you get to the hospital. You didn't have a problem with the team before. Everybody was...
Well, everybody was working together at that point.
Right.
When it changed over to this other doctor, it was like...
In an instant.
In an instant, now everything changes. Now I'm the boss. This is how it's going to be. I'm not going to listen to anybody else. This is how it's going to be. End of story. And that's how the approach was. It went from a team effort to a very, I'm driving the bus, and this is how it's going to be.
Dictatorship.
Dictated.
And what was your impression when you met? Like, did you feel that there was... No, I mean, it's one thing to be a bossy doctor. I've met a lot of bossy doctors. Did you feel that there was that there was eyes on you suddenly by this woman?
Yeah.
I remember because we spoke before, and you'd said you instantly got a feel that this woman disliked you.
Well,
from the get-go.
Yeah.
Right, and then so the following morning, Rob went home and he had come right back, and we were actually in the family room off the ward, meeting there, and she had walked in, and we had our son with us, and she sat down and she says, you know, we've got off to the bad start. Let's try to reconnect and everything, and you know, apologize and let's be friends. And I thought, no, can't be friends. You know, tone has already been set. And so we went from there, and then she looked at us and she said, by the way, you've starved and neglected your child since birth, and Child and Family Services have been called.
What's your reaction?
We're just blown away, because you know, you go in there, you go into the hospital. What do you think to get your son better? And then you've got somebody who's completely shooting off the deep end and coming up with all kinds of allegations that aren't even remotely accurate.
And it's not based. Let's just, for our viewers at home. Sorry, our listeners on Element FM radio can't see this, but this is their son's file. This is
Some of it.
some of it. Wait, I have more. We've got more. Like, this is the documentation that's involved in this file. We've got health records. Let's start. There's the health records here. So all of this is documented. You know, we're not sitting here making this up, that what this woman would say or wouldn't say, or that the child wasn't getting proper care, or that you were refusing to do what medical staff are saying. It's all documented in here, exactly how it all shook down. And I can say, having read it, you know, it seemed to me that the team that you had talked about, they would just make notes of, oh, we talked to mom about this. Mom had tried breastfeeding for this amount of time, tried pumping, said she had trouble with pumping. Just very standard things that you would expect.
Yep.
And then there's an entry in here, and it seems to be when the tone started to change, which was from around, I think it was October 23rd.
That was, so around October 23rd, that would have been about a Tuesday, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Well, hang on, I just want to back up 1 second. So, you know, I just made a couple notes here. We've got October 19th, October 20th, October 21st. There's no issues, baby's feeding well, mom's been feeding 10 minutes, supplementing with formula. Like, this is all just really excellent caloric intake, excellent weight gain we have from the 21st. This is from the team, right? And when you get to October 23rd, that's when, and it's a long, most of these
So October 23rd is what I'm thinking is, on the Tuesday, Anchor had come to visit the hospital, and they had only wanted to speak with myself, and I said, no, we're going to speak, this is a family situation, and it's going to be with my husband as well as myself.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like trying to entrapment, and I refused to speak to them, and then my husband came and we spoke to them collectively. The following day, however, was the Wednesday, and I'm thinking that's what you're referring to as the change in the documentation.
Yes, because the notes started getting, mom was aggravated.
And that could be. And, you know, because nobody was listening. Because she had stopped all communication with the entire team. The team would no longer speak to us. They were not allowed to. Same thing with the nursing staff, right? However, I do know on the Wednesday, that was the doctors at the Children's Hospital's first contact with our family doctor.
That's the first contact.
That is the first contact. And that was after Anchor had come to visit us.
And Anchor, just for people who aren't from Winnipeg, that's the All Nations Coordinated Response. All Nations
Coordinated Response.
Yes, it's a CFS agency. It's kind of the intake agency for everybody who comes into a CFS care. And they were notified by this doctor,
yes, so
who said, I'm legally obligated to make a call to them because this is a safety issue.
Right, and the typical format on how they would do it in the hospital is that they would actually contact the social work department within the hospital and then go through those steps. However, though, she had indicated that at that time, later on the Friday, that there was no staff available, that they had all gone home for the day, that she just made the call herself directly to Anchor.
So what happens, you're in there on the 10th day?
On the 10th day.
10th day, this is 10 days in hospital with baby, monitoring his weight, his eating, his day 10.
So Rob and I were there, and we went out to the Canada Inns, which is connected to the hospital, and we were sitting there at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was an overhead call for us to go back to the board. And I looked at my husband and I said, this is it.
Yeah.
I said, they're coming to get our son. And he said, no, Tiffany, he says, I think you're overreacting, right? That's not. And we go upstairs and we get off the elevator and the doctor was standing there. And so the way that the hospital is formatted is it's like a courtyard. So if you think of a square box and you walk around, right? So at the top end of it is the nursing desk, and there's rooms all along one end and rooms all along the other end. And so we walked down the hallway, and at the very end by the nursing desk was our son's room. She had said to us, you can leave your son here. And at that, around the nursing desk was all of the nurses and staff, healthcare aides, as well as security guards. There was approximately 3-4 of them all standing there. And so we put our son down and we walked down, crossed by them, and then all the way down the hallway again to where there were 2 social workers with Anchor sitting there. And she sat down, and the doctor was actually, she was smiling. And I thought to myself, I thought, very unprofessional, very, disheartening the way that she was, and I had already known what was occurring.
You could smell it. I mean,
I knew.
You know how the system works. You've been working with kids who are in care.
Exactly.
Rob, I'm curious, how are you feeling? Like, as you see this going, you didn't think it was going to happen.
Crazy. I didn't even expect that. Like,
she's telling you this is what's going to happen, and you're still thinking no.
But like Tiffany said, the doctor was just smiling, like she, oh, I've got my way here. I got what I wanted. I got this child away from these people, and it was sad. Like, and they pranced us around in front of everybody, and that was the most sickening thing ever, I think.
It's almost like you're a circus show, like a sideshow.
This woman, I should point out too, one of the other things that I thought noteworthy in her records was she had mentioned that I saw Tiffany, I'll read it exactly. Notably, Tiffany was holding the baby and giving him a bottle while walking down the hallway. He was dressed in short-sleeved outfit with shorts. Inappropriate layering of clothing. So I thought, well, that's, to make a note like that. But, it's October, you're inside a hospital, the baby is wearing short sleeves and stuff. She had never come and asked you, why is the baby dressed like that? Rob, why was the baby dressed like that?
Because he was vomiting so often, we had a hard time keeping him in clothes, to be honest. It was, I was going home, periodically and, having to wash and bring a whole bunch of stuff back to the hospital all the time. And that's a lot of the reason why every day I would go home with a big bag of stuff. So we were actually running out of clean clothes to put him in. Yeah. And that was the reason that
And she would have known if she had have asked.
Exactly. She didn't want to ask you see.
We're running out of time here quickly in this block, but so this isn't the end of it. Your baby's apprehended.
So our baby's apprehended.
Not taken to your family.
No, so he's apprehended, and what happens is that the social workers, they kneel down as they're apprehending our son and telling us this, and as Rob leaves the room, the one social worker kneels down and she looks at me and she says, Tiffany, have you ever had thoughts of hurting yourself or others? And I looked at her and I said, this conversation is over. And I looked over to my husband and I said, I will meet you at the Aboriginal room on the Health Science Center. And that is where I went. And my son, that was the last time I saw him until approximately December. So October 25th, approximately 2:10 p.m. till mid-December.
We're going to get into the rest of their story when we come back. We do have time for a caller. We have a caller from BC. Are you there? Arthur? Arthur, are you with us? Oh, we don't. Okay, well, we will take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to finish, because this, believe it or not, isn't even the worst part of it. So when we come back, there are $200,000 year-long battle against CFS and criminal charges. Yeah, we didn't even get to the part about the criminal charges coming up. And we're going to be joined by their lawyer, so stick around. He's got much to say about this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking with Tiffany and Rob Evans, who just regular folks whose lives were thrown into the most horrific hell you can imagine. Their infant son is sick, and he's taken by CFS because of one doctor's opinion, an opinion based more on gut or maybe even ill will than any actual medical evidence. And an all too keen CFS system that seemed to be, instead of admitting a mistake and returning the baby to his parents, doubled down on fighting to keep him in care for for the duration of his infancy. To be clear, this baby was robbed of his family for most of his first year of life. Joining us too is their lawyer, Jürgen Feldschmidt. So I want to talk, when I had heard this, Tiffany had shared this with me just a couple years ago. I was shocked that how can anybody lose a baby? Just one person making one allegation, and then there's no investigation, checks or balances. They can just come and take your baby, and a year later you're still fighting to get your baby back. How does this happen?
Well, I think a lot of so much rested on the particular doctor that you were discussing just a moment ago in your show. As a lawyer, when you're confronted by expert evidence, and this happens in all kinds of cases, I think one of the things you run up against is sort of society's belief in science, or that doctors, if you have a degree behind your name, that you're on some level infallible. And if a doctor says that something's happening, that unless there's very strong evidence to counter that, that's sort of accepted by anybody who's hearing that. I think from the perspective of the agency, by having this doctor take the very strong position she took, that that what was causing this was Tiffany's improper feeding of her child, the agency was put in a very difficult position, because if, say, they decided to take what in hindsight would have been a more reasonable position, and perhaps worked with the family, leaving the child in place, just making sure that proper medical attention is being provided, and then something really did happen because there was something going on with Tiffany's mental health. And then it turns out later that some doctor was saying, this is a real problem, this child's at risk, and they didn't apprehend. The blowback from that for the agency would be very, very, could be very, very difficult for them to deal with. But, at the end of the day, it starts off, I think, with a professional engaging in what I would maybe in shorthand describe as some form of professional hubris, making allegations that were not well founded or tested, and then feeding that into a child welfare system that I think does sometimes trigger and function more like a law enforcement agency than it does an agency that's there to protect families and work with families.
Well, they had been working with a team before this doctor came in and threw a wrench in all of that. I'm surprised that the agency, either the first agency, Anchor, who you've dealt with, or the second agency, Métis CFS, because when you had identified as Métis, then they went from, you went into the Métis Child and Family Services Agency. But nobody within either of those agencies bothered to go back and talk to the team.
Nobody actually even spoke to anyone that had dealings with Kynan. When Anchor did their investigation, they spoke with my ex-husband and they spoke with Rob's ex-wife. They did not speak with our aunt, with anybody that had any contact with Kynan at all.
Or medical professionals who were part of this, like trying to figure out what's wrong this child has, and what ended up being wrong.
Well, he was diagnosed with gastroesophageal reflux.
And this was how long after he'd been apprehended?
He received the diagnosis on the 18th. And at that time, the doctor had said that this will probably last till he's approximately between the ages of 18 to 20 months. And sure enough, that's approximately the time frame that it lasted till.
So, and I have his medical file. It's gone now, but it's like this thick if you weren't here before the break. And in it, there's a note they have to take child logs, like every day of the type of care, what's going on with the little boy who's in their care. He's 5 months old. And they had, throughout, he ate well. He had a small amount of vomiting in the afternoon. That's okay, thanks. He had another one says, he had episodes of vomiting with infant formula. These are throughout the whole time that he's in care.
Right, and so these things.
So what he was apprehended for, because you are doing something wrong to him, that's still happening when he's in care.
Yeah. Well, one of the allegations was Munchausen by proxy.
Right, you're doing this too.
Right, that I'm inflicting this pain on our son in order for myself to get attention.
Yeah.
Right.
And you had said, I just wanted to circle back, so he had lost how much weight when he was in the hospital, and then versus how much after the apprehension?
So, he was gaining ounces in weight, and then he got apprehended. He was put into a foster home, and he lost half a kilo, like in a matter of days.
And this is all documented.
It's all documented in there. And, and they tried their best to say, oh, he doesn't vomit in our care. He doesn't vomit in our care. That's all it was. Every day was all you'd hear from them. Oh, he's not vomiting.
And the home that they placed him in initially, if you recall, it was a non-culturally appropriate home. The home did not speak English, and they had to keep reiterating to the caregiver, the male, that do not place him on the couch because he could potentially roll off. Do not place him there. Do not place him there. And in the notes it stated that they felt uncomfortable leaving him there, but they did.
At no point do you look at these, you've got the access to the child logs too. You're seeing what the agency is seeing. Are you not thinking, why the hell is he still in care? This is the same stuff that you're documenting in his file is the same things that had been happening at home. Why do you have this child?
Well, certainly we brought that to the attention of the agency, prior to the trial occurring, and certainly that was a big, one of the many features of the evidence that we brought forward, that it can't be that mom is doing something untoward with this child, because the child, first thing that happens when the child comes into care is, as Rob and Tiffany just said, there was a huge weight crash in the first week or less than a week that he was there. Yeah. So obviously there's continuing problems there. It can't be related to mom and dad, because mom and dad are no longer caring for this child. But again, I go back to this idea that I think the system, judges, lawyers, administrators of the agencies, they can only go on the information, evidence that's made available to them. And the opinion of an expert, like a doctor, is very, very persuasive. And once that gets hold, and you've got an expert who is not just giving their opinion, but even advocating to some degree on a particular perspective or position, it's so difficult to, counter that through cross-examination, through, those processes. I mean, I think one of the things that we considered in preparation for this trial was, is there some way that we can maybe hire an independent physician of similar credentials, similar area of specialty as the doctor that dealt with Kynan? Well, the thing that you have to think about is who's paying for that. The doctor that testified against Tiffany and Rob, the information she gathered was in the process of publicly funded medical services that were provided. Right. And then, she's brought in to testify in court against mom and dad, right? Mom and dad, what do they have to do? One possibility, we didn't do this in the end, but one possibility is, do we need to get some other expert doctor to look at the chart and give a counter opinion if there is one available, if in their opinion there is a counter interpretation. In the end, we couldn't do that, or didn't do that, because the other thing that behind all this, it's been mentioned once or twice in this in this broadcast already, but the unbelievable costs that were borne by Tiffany and Rob to try and respond to all of this in court and by other means. And you actually have to take, you think to yourself, boy, this involves my child. I will leave no stone unturned. There's nothing I won't do. Well, the reality is that even for, a well-employed middle-class family, there are real limitations. At some point, the means to spend another $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 on this course on this litigation strategy or evidentiary strategy in terms of calling in a counter expert or something like that. There's some real triaging that has to be done in terms of how do we respond to this, and then you're facing government-funded agencies, the
Unlimited
agencies themselves,
amounts
to
of
some
money.
degree even the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Tiffany was charged with criminal, those charges were stayed, they went nowhere in the end, but at some...
I haven't even got into that.
At one point she not only had to retain me, or they had to not only retain me, but they had to retain criminal counsel as well. So you've got these huge government-funded, ultimately government-funded and controlled bureaucracies set upon, the individual citizen of our nation who has only their own private financial means with which to defend themselves. And as I said, you have to make some tough decisions about how you can respond in a cost-effective way, hoping that in the end you will prevail.
You were charged, just I guess a couple months after Simon was apprehended, you were charged with failing to provide the necessities of life by the Winnipeg Police Service.
That's correct. Approximately January 20th.
They had, brought you in. I think it was under the guise of bring your daughter for a visit or something like that. Bring your daughter for a visit or...
No, they had actually called us on the Tuesday, and they had said that they wanted to meet with myself and Rob on the Thursday. Our daughter was going away on a trip that weekend, and I had said to them, well, I got to do some running around. They said, well, I suggest you go and do that before coming in. Okay. So on that note, I had already started thinking they are going to criminally charge one of us, and it's more than likely going to be myself. So I had immediately drew up a document to transfer guardianship of my daughter over to my aunt and my uncle. When we had gone in, they separated Rob and myself immediately, and they interrogated both, and immediately they had charged myself. And they kept saying, you might as well just admit it, you might as well just admit it, you starved your son, you starved your son.
Who is in care, continuing to lose weight.
Correct.
Yeah.
Months after he was taken from you.
Still vomiting in
Still
care.
Sick.
With, when Rob was going for visits and our daughter was going for visits, there was still vomits all over the place, emesis. And I remember Rob saying to me when we were in the police, what did they tell? When you were being interrogated by the police.
Oh, it was everything possible to try and get me to spin and say, oh yeah, well she was hurting him, It was it was ridiculous. It was,
just not.
Oh yeah, you don't have to say anything. You just nod your head. Yes, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. It was the most disgusting thing that I've ever gone through in my life.
These charges were ultimately stayed. But you had to, you had said, let's break down for people at home. Because keeping in mind, a lot of people who are dealing with this, they don't have the means to do this. Like Jürgen had mentioned, that they don't. You're either on your own trying to self-represent, maybe you get a legal aid lawyer. A lot of people don't have the means to do this. What does it cost to fight CFS, and what did it cost to have these charges were ultimately stayed, but you still had to pay a lawyer? What are the costs for this for people?
Thankfully, we had one of the most kind-hearted criminal lawyers in Canada, Saul Simmons, and he worked with us and everything, and that costed probably about $25,000, and between Jürgen's bill.
Wait, it's not just your bill, but it's not just his bill. There's I noticed here, it's $1,000 for photocopies for some health records.
Yes.
So we're not saying that you took this from her. We're not saying that.
I appreciate that.
In the grand scheme of things, we're saying probably upwards, just maybe over $200,000.
$200,000 probably.
Yeah, just to be fair.
For lawyers, for psychologists, for your,
And because we had to retain our own psychologist because, immediately, and when kind of was apprehended, I immediately said to Jürgen, I'm going to go and get an assessment. I'm going to go get an assessment. And he said to me, no, do not do that. Just wait, just wait. And so in December, we had hired our own psychologist, the chief psychologist of Manitoba for the federal penitentiaries. And we had a full psychiatric assessment completed. And just after Christmas, because they kept saying mental health,
right.
And one of the famous lines of the lawyer with Métis Child and Family Services was, she's too far gone, she's too far gone. This was a...
that was their psychologist.
That was their psychologist.
That's theirs.
Grigo.
So what ended up happening was, I ended up being diagnosed with traits of depression and traits of anxiety that were situational based.
I wonder why.
So after, they said that they wanted to do a parent-child capacity assessment, and heels were being dug in on that, and, it was being pushed out. And so finally I started making telephone calls and got the ball rolling, and Dr. Grigo was hired to conduct a full parent-child capacity assessment.
And I'm trying to, we've got about 6 minutes left. I want to, from the time he was taken till the time you get him back, till the time the trial is done, give us a timeline.
So he was apprehended October 25th at approximately 2 p.m.
October 25th, 2013.
2013, we did the parent-child capacity assessment. It started about the third week of April of 2014. Okay. And at that time is where they had to do variations of the criminal charges so that I was able to see our son. But also recall, during that time frame, our daughter was not at home either.
She's
from
with her
January
aunt.
With her aunt. So
Yes.
at that time we have no children. And then
why couldn't your son have gone with an aunt?
Well, we tried to have our son placed with family.
So first of all, the main thing was that first of all they tried to split us up. Oh, if you and Tiffany split up, then the child can come home to you. You know?
Yeah.
And I said, well, we're not in the process of letting that happen because, you know, you guys have already caused enough damage. You're not splitting this up. But we want our son to be with family. Nope. They were saying, oh, yeah, we could do that. But they were just stalling, just trying to kill time.
And it ended up being that they said our niece was a threat to our son, who at the time was approximately 7-8 years old. So.
I do find it adorable when a lot of people, and you will appreciate this, a lot of people say, you know, we need to take back control of our our child's social services. It's our own agencies that are perpetuating this against us as well.
That's correct.
Like this, I've heard this too many times across this country. This isn't about white man's doing this to us. This is our own agencies are doing this. Our people, and they are doing it too. This was an Indigenous agency.
I think one of the things you could say about the agencies is, you know, the expression "old wine in new bottles." You know, the agencies, you know, they are Indigenous child welfare agencies, but they're contained within these bottles that were created under the, if you want to say the non-Aboriginal, the white man's system
colonial
or whatever.
Systems, yeah.
You know, they are still responsible under legislation that's passed under the, you know, by the Manitoba legislature, and are the same child welfare laws that all people are governed by. In addition, you know, not every individual in a place of in a supervisory role and so forth in each one of these agencies is necessarily a First Nations person.
Right.
There's that balance between having people who are qualified to do that type of work versus whether they are in fact First Nations people. When the agencies were first created or devolved into having activity within the city of Winnipeg, there was a huge crunch in terms of getting qualified people to act for those agencies and then transfer over to First Nation people who
and now it's one of our biggest employers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Indigenous people make up huge amounts of in the social services, as either social workers, some other foster parents. I mean, this is a big employer. This is our livelihood.
It's a machine, right? It's a machine now.
It's
a machine.
It's an industry, is what it is. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, and it's all one big circle that funds the others.
We are dwindling on time. How's your son now?
Our son's good.
He's how old now?
He just turned 6. We noticed some of the challenges from when he, Do
you want me to? Because of the specific period of time in his development that he was separated from Tiffany and Rom, there is certain bonding and interaction with mom that needs to occur for a child to develop in a completely normal way. And this was flagged by Dr. Grigo in his report, and there was some programming that Tiffany was given to try and work on attachment and so forth after he was returned. But the reality is that that period of time he was away from Tiffany has had an effect, and it affects his behavior to this day, and I'm not a psychologist, but I expect it will affect him on some level for the balance of his life.
Can they get any of the money back that was spent? Is there any recourse?
No, basically no. And what it is it's very similar to a criminal prosecution. So if you're charged with an offense and that matter is stayed or that matter is taken to trial and you're acquitted, you have to prove, you know, sort of willful, intentional malfeasance on the part of the Crown in order to have a wrongful prosecution suit, for example. And the same similar principle acts for these agencies. And I guess the issue there is that if that were not the rule, these agencies and ultimately the government would be besought with suits and claims from all kinds of people who felt that their cases were without merit. So they have that protection, and therefore it's like someone who's accused by a crime. They may have a big lawyer bill at the end, but they're not able to recover it from the Crown, even if they were acquitted.
So all of the fight that we did and all the money that we put towards our son, which was a fight that we had to fight, unfortunately now it has taken away from our children, from their education, from their extracurriculars, going forward for the rest of their life, because that's a fact, right?
We're all out of time. I told you this was going to be an incredible, unbelievable story that you would want to miss. Thank you, Tiffany and Rob, for sharing your family's story. And thank you, Jürgen, for taking the time to join our discussion. I really appreciate this. Thanks to all of you, our viewers and our listeners. This episode is available for a download as a podcast on our website, aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Melissa Ridgen. I'll see you back here next week for our season finale of APTN InFocus. Have a great afternoon.